Engineering Neuro-Recovery, number 1530, VPT 085, the 9th of February 2026, Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, category, Neuroscience. Introduction. From daily practice to structural brain repair after my hemorrhagic stroke near the pontine region on June 21, 2025, more than 7 months have passed. During this period, I have focused on carefully observing my neurological changes and conducting self-directed recovery efforts based on the specific damage I noticed. The first damage I observed was memory loss, involving both short-term and long-term memory. This should not be attributed directly to the stroke location itself, since the pons primarily controls essential life functions such as heartbeat, breathing, and swallowing. However, I experienced multiple seizures within 24 hours after the stroke. Therefore, my memory loss was more likely a result of these seizures rather than direct pontine damage. Nevertheless, during the so-called golden recovery period, roughly the first 90 days after the stroke, I focused intensely on memory rehabilitation. I used daily repetitive testing similar to the training methods used by athletes and musicians, relying on repetition and structured practice. Over time, my memory steadily recovered from an estimated 40% loss to approximately a 2% to 5% residual deficit at present. I describe this 90-day golden period as a time-dependent window viscosity, during which repetitive stress self-training prevented permanent loss plasticity. The second phenomenon I noticed was an improvement in my cognitive capability. In October, I unexpectedly recalled subjects such as topology, which I learned in 1967, and stochastic processes, which I learned in 1978, topics I had not actively used for 5 to 6 decades. I am now applying these concepts directly in my medical research work. In addition, my viewing angle has become wider, and the depth of my insight has increased since the stroke. This is a fascinating example of neural unmasking, in which the brain bypasses damaged areas and awakens long-dormant pathways. The third change I noticed was emotional. Since November 2025, my emotional sensitivity has become sharper, my emotional shield appears to have softened, and my threshold for tears has lowered. Why my emotional shield softened after the stroke? Before the stroke, my brain had a strong internal control system that filtered emotions before they reached the surface. After the stroke near the pons, that control system became weaker. What changed was not my personality, but the regulation mechanism. Loss of a control layer, like removing a risk filter. Think of the pons as a major routing hub in a trading system. Orders from the strategy layer. The thinking brain passed through it before reaching execution, the body and emotional response. Part of that routing includes risk filters that suppress emotional overreaction. When the stroke damaged some of those pathways, the emotional risk filter weakened. As a result, emotions now reach the surface faster and more easily. The threshold for tears dropped not because emotions increased, but because the control layer that once dampened them was partially removed. This is similar to a system in which position limits are loosened and price movements are felt more directly. Higher sensitivity to internal signals like higher market volatility. The pons is tightly linked to automatic systems such as heartbeat and breathing. These are like background market data feeds. Emotions are closely tied to these internal signals. After the stroke, these signals became amplified. Similar to trading in a high volatility market, small internal changes now trigger larger emotional responses. Feelings become more immediate and more physical, like watching price move tick by tick instead of on a daily chart. In short, my emotional shield did not disappear, it thinned. The system now reacts faster and with less buffering. This is not weakness. It is a change in system sensitivity and control, similar to moving from a heavily filtered trading strategy to a more direct, high-resolution one. This emotional sensitivity reflects a control system change, not a personality change. The brain is the most amazing and complex organ in the human body. It is far more advanced than any artificial intelligence hardware available today. The most advanced AI chips in 2026 contain about 80 billion transistors, which is numerically comparable to a newborn baby's approximately 86 billion neurons. However, for a more complete engineering comparison, an adult human brain has about 100 trillion synapses, which dwarfs the electrical connections of an AI chip. This difference reflects not only quantity, but dynamic adaptability. After July 1, 2025, I began intensive self-study in neuroscience. Before my stroke, my knowledge of brain function was essentially zero. Over the past 210 days, as part of this self-learned neuroscience journey, I have written approximately 200 stroke-related research papers, along with about 40 papers on other subjects. The stroke may have damaged my brain to a certain degree, but it also ignited a strong and persistent drive to understand how my brain works and how it can recover. I have learned one central lesson: stroke recovery is not just brain repair. It is brain reorganization through neuroplasticity. Things I do to improve my brain performance: daily neuro-recovery practice as system design. I use audio playback to listen to my own writing while I do my daily walking. This reduces eye strain and allows continuous learning without visual fatigue. I use handwriting, not typing, to write my daily journal in a notebook. This is a deliberate design choice. By handwriting, I stimulate approximately 15 to 18 brain regions, compared with only 2 to 5 regions typically activated by digital devices. This daily routine is not a habit. It is a structured neuro-recovery system that integrates movement, cognition, language, and memory into a single continuous loop. Walking provides rhythmic physical input, audio playback reinforces memory and comprehension, and handwriting forces spatial, motor, and cognitive coordination. Self-learned neuroscience as a recovery tool. I learned this neuroscience knowledge entirely through self-study by reading textbooks and several hundred published research papers. To support my stroke research, I have read more than 1,000 pages of neuroscience literature. I am a 100% self-learned medical scientist. Being self-learned has shaped how I think and how I recover. I was not trained to stop at textbook boundaries or fix clinical protocols. Instead, I rely on first principles, direct observation, and repeated testing on myself. My stroke recovery has become a real-world stress strain experiment on the human brain, observed longitudinally rather than inferred statistically. Why handwriting matters. In neuroscience perspective. From a neuroscience perspective, handwriting activates far more brain functions than typing or tapping on a screen. Handwriting simultaneously requires visual processing for spatial layout, fine motor control for precise movement, language centers for word selection, and working memory to hold thoughts while forming each letter. These processes occur at the same time, forcing multiple brain regions to cooperate rather than operate in isolation. In contrast, digital typing relies on repetitive, low-complexity motor actions that reinforce narrow neural loops. By handwriting my daily journal, I intentionally cross-train my neural pathways. This is not an abstract theory. After a stroke, the brain must reroute functions around damaged areas. Consistent, structured stimulation across multiple regions increases the probability of successful reorganization and reduces learned non-use. Stroke recovery as an engineering problem. Building on this daily recovery practice, I now view stroke rehabilitation not as passive healing but as an engineering problem: how to deliberately re-engage, reroute, and stabilize damaged neural systems. Traditional medicine relies heavily on probability. It predicts whether a patient will recover but rarely explains how recovery can be actively shaped. What I observe in my own recovery, and what recent neuroscience breakthroughs confirm, is that the brain is not only plastic but repairable. Structure, timing, and input design matter. This is exactly the logic behind my VPT framework. Neuroimaging evidence supporting handwriting-based re-engineering. My intuition about handwriting versus typing is now supported by modern neuroimaging research. Studies published in 2025 and 2026 using high-density EEG and fMRI show that handwriting activates a broad, integrated neural network, including the parietal lobe for spatial organization, the premotor cortex for motor planning, and the hippocampus for memory formation. These findings explain why handwriting helps prevent loss of function after a stroke, while tapping on digital devices trains the brain to repeat only a few limited movements. This evidence aligns precisely with my deliberate choice to stimulate 15 to 18 brain regions through manual journaling. Pharmacological advances and the VPT time window. Pharmacological breakthroughs are now converging with this engineering view of recovery. In February 2026, Phase 3 trial results for the neuroprotective drug lobramisol were presented at the American Stroke Association Conference. In the LACE study, patients were divided into two groups. One group received the study drug, lobramisol. The control group received a placebo or standard care without the active drug. In this study, 69% of patients who received the drug achieved excellent functional recovery, compared with a 56% recovery rate in the control group. The control group allows researchers to determine whether improvement is due to the drug itself rather than natural recovery, rehabilitation, or chance. The drug works by protecting the neurovascular unit, blocking harmful chemical signals, and reducing excessive nerve firing. From a VPT perspective, it helps stabilize brain tissue during the critical recovery window, reducing the chance that temporary stress becomes permanent damage. Boundary control and secondary stroke prevention. Another study in February 2026, the Oceanic Stroke Trial, showed that the drug asundexian reduced the chance of having another stroke by 26% without increasing serious bleeding. In simple terms, the drug helps prevent dangerous clots while still allowing normal blood flow. Within the VPT framework, this represents prevention of systemic collapse while preserving overall systemic integrity. It reinforces the idea that recovery and prevention are structural problems, not merely statistical ones. Structural repair at the molecular scale. Materials science is also moving in the same direction. In January 2026, researchers at Northwestern University reported an injectable nanomaterial often described as dancing molecules. These supramolecular structures dynamically adapt to cellular motion, allowing them to cross the blood-brain barrier and repair damaged tissue without invasive surgery. This approach represents engineering-based medicine at the molecular level, repairing structure directly rather than managing symptoms indirectly. Brain-computer interfaces and active rewiring. Brain-computer interfaces offer another example of active brain repair. In 2026, the IPSA-HEN system received expanded FDA approval. It reads movement signals from the healthy side of the brain and uses them to help move the weakened hand. By repeating this process, the brain learns new pathways for movement instead of waiting for recovery to occur on its own. For stroke survivors whose recovery has stopped improving, this shows that focused, hands-on brain training can restart recovery rather than leaving the brain stuck. Synthesis, recovery as controlled re-engineering. Taken together, these observations and breakthroughs support what I have learned from my own body. Recovery is not random. It's not purely statistical. It is a controllable process governed by timing, structure, energy input, and repeated activation. Structural relaxation of emotional control and cognitive improvement. I now see the change in my emotional sensitivity not as a weakness, but as a form of structural relaxation within my brain. Before the stroke, my emotional control system was more rigid. In VPT terms, it behaved like a high-viscosity structure, filtering and suppressing emotional signals before they reach conscious awareness. The stroke partially disrupted that structure. As a result, the rigidity softened. Emotional signals now flow more freely and reach the surface with less resistance. This is not a loss of control, but a change in system properties. From an engineering perspective, the system shifted from a heavily damped state to a more responsive one. This structural relaxation expanded the range of sensory and emotional input my brain can process. To a scientist, this is not a defect, it is an increase in resolution. The brain now receives more information per unit time, with less filtering. I believe this same softening also explains the unexpected return of long-dormant memories. By lowering the emotional and cognitive shield, deeper memory layers became accessible again. Concepts such as topology from the 1960s and stochastic processes from the 1970s, and used for decades, resurfaced and are now actively applied in my research. In this sense, emotional softening and cognitive reopening are linked. Structural relaxation reduced resistance not only to emotion, but also to memory retrieval and insight. The stroke damaged certain pathways, but it also altered the internal balance of control and access. What was once tightly gated became more permeable. This observation reinforces my central view. Stroke recovery is not simply repair of damaged tissue. It is a reconfiguration of structure, control, and flow within the brain. Conclusion: my daily routine of walking with audio playback and handwriting my journal is not a lifestyle preference. It is a form of neural system integration. Modern neuroscience is now confirming what engineering intuition has long suggested: the brain can be re-engineered, retrained, and rebuilt. Even late in life, as in my own case in my late 70s, when the effort is intentional, engages multiple brain regions, is sustained over time, and is guided by scientific evidence. In summary, stroke recovery is not random. It is controllable, structural, time-dependent, path-dependent, and engineerable. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own, all intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.